The ship's warning alarms blared as Commander Cale Mercer struggled with the failing controls. The exploration vessel Artemis shuddered violently around him, atmospheric entry burning through systems faster than the auto-repair could manage. "Computer status report," Cale shouted over the cacophony of alarms. "Hull integrity at 42%. Engine core destabilizing. Landing systems compromised. Recommend immediate evacuation," the artificial voice responded with inappropriate calm. Cale's jaw tightened. Evacuation wasn't an option, not in an uncharted planetary system with no guarantee of rescue. The Artemis was 3 light-years from the nearest outpost, its distress beacon likely too weak to reach Earth command. "Override landing protocol. Manual control," he commanded, gripping the throttle with white knuckles. The descent was brutal. Metal screamed against atmosphere as the ship plummeted toward the alien landscape, a terrain of purple-hued forests and crystalline formations that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Cale's military training took over as he fought gravity, managing to level the craft enough to prevent a fatal nosedive. The impact came with a deafening crash. Cale's head slammed against the control panel, consciousness flickering as emergency systems deployed around him. When he came to, the cockpit was filled with smoke and the quiet hiss of ruptured hydraulics. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye as he unstrapped himself. The ship's main section had held together, but readings indicated the engine core was beyond repair. He was stranded. After gathering emergency supplies and his personal kit, Cale forced open the damaged hatch. The air that rushed in was surprisingly breathable, oxygen-rich with traces of unfamiliar elements that tingled in his lungs but triggered no immediate rejection response from his biomonitor. The landscape around him was alien in every sense, vegetation with structures that defied Earth biology, moving in patterns that suggested awareness. The twin suns overhead cast everything in a lavender light that made his eyes strain to adjust. Cale had taken no more than 50 steps from the wreckage when he sensed movement. His hand reached for the pulse weapon at his hip. "I wouldn't," came a voice, oddly accented but unmistakably in his language. She emerged from behind a crystal formation, humanoid but clearly not human. Her skin had a subtle blue luminescence, with intricate patterns that might have been natural markings or some form of cultural signifier. Most striking were her eyes, entirely silver with no discernible pupil, yet clearly focused on him with analytical precision. "You understand me," Cale said, neither lowering his weapon nor raising it further. "Your language matrix was simple to decode," she replied, her expression unchanging. "Your ship's transmission burst contained sufficient linguistic data. You intercepted our communications. We monitor all atmospheric anomalies," she gestured at his weapon. "That will discharge ineffectively in our atmosphere. The energy will dissipate before reaching any target." Cale hesitated before slowly lowering the weapon. "I'm Commander Cale Mercer of Earth Exploration Command." "I am Zyra," she replied, her tone as flat as her expression. "You have crashed on a world your kind would call Eleutheria. My people are the Vashanti." "I need to repair my ship," Cale stated. Zyra's silver eyes scanned the wreckage behind him. "That is not possible. Your technology is incompatible with our resources, and the damage extends beyond basic repair parameters." The clinical assessment hit Cale like a physical blow. "Then I need to send a long-range distress signal." "Also unlikely to succeed," she said without a hint of sympathy. "This system is surrounded by unique radiation fields that distort outgoing signals." Cale fought back rising desperation. "Then I'll need to survive until Earth Command sends a search party. They'll notice when I don't make the scheduled rendezvous." For the first time, something like consideration crossed Zyra's features. "The cycle of seasons changes rapidly here. The coming cold period will kill you without proper preparation." "Are you offering help?" Cale asked cautiously. "The Vashanti Council has protocols for handling alien visitors," she replied. "I am assigned to assess whether you represent a threat. If you do not, basic survival assistance is permitted." "I'm not a threat," Cale said firmly. "I'm a stranded explorer." Zyra studied him, her expression unreadable. "We shall see, human. Follow me if you wish to survive your first night. The predators here hunt by the vibrations of unfamiliar movement patterns. Your walk announces your alien nature to everything within hunting distance." She turned without waiting for his response, moving with fluid grace across the crystalline terrain. Kale shouldered his emergency pack and followed, acutely aware that his survival now depended on a being who viewed him with all the emotional investment of a scientific specimen. The first night on Eleutheria had begun, and already Kale understood that surviving this world would require more than just his military training. It would demand adapting to an alien culture that seemed as cold and impenetrable as Zyra herself. 14 days on Eleutheria had taught Commander Kale Mercer more about survival than a decade in Earth's Special Reconnaissance Division. Each morning began with Zyra's efficient assessment of their needs, delivered without preamble or pleasantry. The moisture collectors require cleaning. The perimeter sensors detected 3 predator passes during the night cycle. The protein cultures need harvesting. Her silver eyes never lingered on him longer than necessary, her movements economical as she prepared the bitter stimulant drink that had become their morning ritual. They had established a temporary shelter in what Zyra called a quiet zone, a natural depression in the crystalline landscape where the native predators rarely ventured. The structure itself was an amalgamation of salvaged components from Kale's ship and local materials Zyra had harvested with practiced efficiency. "We need to extend our foraging range," Kale said, examining their dwindling supplies. "The local flora you've shown me doesn't provide sufficient calories for my metabolic needs." For a moment, Zyra's silver eyes flicked across his form, a subtle assessment he might have missed if he hadn't been watching for it. 2 weeks of inadequate nutrition had started to whittle away at his muscular frame. "Your physiology requires more energy than anticipated," she acknowledged with the faintest hint of concern. "There are thermal pools 3 navigation units east with microbial colonies that my people sometimes consume during resource scarcity." "You're worried about me?" Kale observed, forcing a smile. Zyra's posture stiffened. "Your survival impacts mission parameters. Dead subjects provide limited data." Despite her cold response, Kale had begun cataloging the subtle tells in her behavior. The slight pause before dismissing his observations about her concern, the way her luminescent skin patterns intensified when they encountered danger, the fact that she had begun preparing his food with flavor-enhancing compounds without being asked. They departed at dawn, Zyra moving with practiced stealth through the purple undergrowth while Kale struggled to mimic her footfall pattern. The twin suns beat down on them as they traversed terrain that shifted from crystalline formations to fungal forests that pulsed with bioluminescence. "Stay close," Zyra warned as they entered a ravine lined with swaying tentacle-like appendages. "These are sensory organs of a colony organism. They detect chemical signatures of potential food sources." "Like us?" Kale asked, eyeing the undulating growths warily. "Like you," she corrected. "My biochemistry registers as inedible, yours is novel." As they navigated the ravine, a low, rumbling vibration shook the ground. Zyra froze, her skin patterns flaring with bright blue urgency. "Tectonic shift," she said tersely. "This passage is unstable." Before Kale could respond, the world lurched beneath them. The crystalline walls fractured with an ear-splitting crack, and a cascade of mineral shards rained down. Kale lunged forward instinctively, tackling Zyra clear of a massive falling crystal column. They rolled together, his body covering hers as debris thundered around them. When the dust settled, they found themselves in a pocket space, the ravine's exit blocked by the collapse. "Are you injured?" Kale asked, quickly examining her for wounds. Zyra stared at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "You risked structural damage to your body to protect me." "That's what partners do," Kale answered without thinking. "Partners," she repeated as if testing the word. "My species is highly resilient. I would have survived the impact." "Maybe, but I wasn't willing to take that chance." Something shifted in her silvery gaze, the faintest ripple across its metallic surface. "An inefficient survival strategy." "Humans are known for our inefficiencies," Kale said with a tired smile. They spent hours clearing a path through the debris, working in a silence that felt somehow different than their previous interactions. When they finally reached the thermal pools, steam rising from their iridescent surfaces, Zyra harvested the promised microbial colonies with meticulous care. That night, as they made camp beneath Eleutheria's 3 moons, Kale noticed Zyra preparing his portion with particular attention, separating out the bitter components, adding the flavor enhancers he had expressed preference for. "The nutrients should restore your energy reserves," she said, passing him a portion significantly larger than her own. "You're giving me your share," Kale observed. "A calculated resource distribution," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "Your larger mass requires greater input." Later, as the alien night creatures began their haunting calls, Kale noticed Zyra sitting slightly closer to him than previous nights, her normally rigid posture marginally relaxed. "Your people," he ventured, breaking their customary evening silence, "do they never work in pairs like we do?" Zyra was quiet for so long that Kale thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new quality, something almost hesitant. "The Vashanti value self-sufficiency above all else. Partnerships are rare, reserved for reproductive necessity or specific research initiatives." "That sounds lonely," Kale said softly. "Loneliness is a concept we do not recognize," she replied, but her skin patterns dimmed subtly. "Emotional attachments create vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities reduce survival probability." Kale studied her profile against the strange constellations. "Yet you're helping me survive." "Yes," she acknowledged, and for the first time she seemed to have no immediate logical explanation to offer. As they settled into sleep, positioned back-to-back as had become their custom, Kale felt a subtle difference in the way Zyra's body aligned with his. A fraction closer. The deliberate distance she had always maintained now imperceptibly reduced. In the darkness, her voice came unexpectedly. "Your survival strategies are intriguing, Commander Kale." It wasn't much, but in the vast loneliness of an alien world, it felt like the first crack in an impenetrable wall. 43 days on Eleutheria, and the lines between survival necessity and something deeper had begun to blur for Commander Kale. The permanent shelter they had constructed together now bore unmistakable signs of their cohabitation. Kale's salvaged equipment arranged according to Zyra's precise organizational system, native materials repurposed with a blend of their technologies, spaces that had gradually shifted from his and hers to simply theirs. The morning ritual remained, but subtle changes had emerged. Zyra still began each day with her assessment, but her formerly clinical reports now carried inflections Kale had learned to recognize. Mild satisfaction when the perimeter had remained secure, the faintest note of anticipation when describing a successful experiment with their food sources. "The adaptive agriculture matrix has produced viable results," she announced, indicating the carefully arranged growth system she had designed using components from Kale's ship combined with native flora. "The cellular structure has reconfigured to match your nutritional requirements." "You mean you've created food specifically compatible with my biology?" Kale asked, genuinely impressed. Zyra's luminescent skin patterns brightened briefly, a response Kale had come to recognize as her version of pride. "It was a logical extension of our survival requirements." "Our survival," Kale repeated, nodding her choice of words. Something flickered across her silver eyes, there and gone in an instant. Efficient vocabulary. But they both knew it was more than that. The careful distance Zyra had maintained during their first weeks had gradually diminished. Now she would sit beside him during the evenings, occasionally asking questions about Earth, about human customs, about Kale himself. Her inquiries remained framed as scientific curiosity, but the increasing frequency betrayed a deeper interest. "Your species forms attachments easily," she observed one evening as Kale described his family back on Earth. "Even to non-familial individuals." "Humans are social creatures," Kale explained. "Connection helps us survive, but it's also how we thrive." "Thriving exceeds survival parameters," Zyra said, but her tone held genuine consideration rather than dismissal. Kale smiled. "That's what makes it worth pursuing." That night, a violent storm descended upon them, one of Eleutheria's notorious atmospheric disruptions that Zyra had warned him about. Lightning of strange purple hues split the sky, and winds carrying crystalline particles battered their shelter. They had prepared for this, reinforcing the structure and securing their supplies, but the ferocity exceeded even Zyra's predictions. "The integrity field is failing," she reported, monitoring the shelter systems as the walls shuddered around them. "We have structural compromise in the east quadrant." Before Kale could respond, a deafening crack split the air. A section of the ceiling buckled, crystalline debris raining down as the support beam fractured. Kale lunged to brace it, using his body to support the failing structure. "The secondary supports need realignment," he grunted, muscles straining. "I can hold this, but not for long." Zyra moved with practiced efficiency, reconfiguring the support system while Kale bore the weight. The minutes stretched painfully as his strength began to waver. "Almost complete," Zyra assured him, her voice carrying an urgency he'd never heard before. "Maintain position." "No problem," Kale said through gritted teeth, feeling something tear in his shoulder. "Just having a typical Tuesday." When the supports finally locked into place, Kale collapsed, his breathing labored. The sharp pain in his shoulder told him he'd sustained a significant injury. Zyra was at his side instantly, silver eyes scanning with unusual intensity. "You're damaged." "Dislocated shoulder," he managed, attempting to sit up. "I've had worse." To his surprise, Zyra's hands were unexpectedly gentle as she helped him into a seated position. "Remain still. I will implement medical intervention." Her examination was thorough, fingers tracing his injured shoulder with a touch that seemed to linger beyond diagnostic necessity. When she determined the extent of the dislocation, she positioned herself behind him. "This will cause temporary pain intensification," she warned, her voice closer to his ear than usual. "I trust you," Kale said simply. Something in his words caused her to pause, her hands momentarily motionless against his skin. Then, with swift precision, she manipulated his joint back into place. Kale's shout of pain echoed through the shelter, but the relief was immediate as the shoulder realigned. Zyra didn't move away as expected. Instead, her hands remained on his skin, the cool touch of her fingers slowly tracing patterns across his shoulder in what could only be described as a soothing gesture. "The damage will heal," she said softly. "Your physiology demonstrates remarkable regenerative capabilities." "Thank you," Kale said, turning his head to meet her gaze. They were closer than they had ever been, the storm raging outside while something equally powerful shifted between them. Zyra's silver eyes studied his face with new intensity, lingering on features she had previously only acknowledged clinically. "You said you trust me," she stated, an unmistakable question hiding beneath the words. "I do," Kale confirmed. "We've kept each other alive for almost 2 months. That builds something." "Builds what?" she asked, and for the first time there was vulnerability in her voice. Kale considered his words carefully. "On Earth, we'd call it a bond." Zyra was silent for a long moment, her luminescent skin patterns shifting through colors Kale had never seen her display before. Deeper blues, hints of purple that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of what he assumed was her heartbeat. "The Vashanti do not form bonds easily," she finally said. "Our evolutionary history made emotional connections dangerous, distracting from survival imperatives." "And yet here we are," Kale observed gently. "Yes," she acknowledged, her hand still resting on his shoulder. "Here we are." That night, as the storm gradually subsided, their customary sleeping arrangement changed without discussion. Instead of positioned back-to-back, Zyra settled beside Kale, her body oriented toward his, close enough that he could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her luminescent skin. "Your injury requires monitoring," she explained, but her eyes held something more complex than clinical concern. "Of course," Kale agreed, not calling attention to the fact that her monitoring equipment could have performed that function from across the room. In the quiet darkness, Zyra spoke with unprecedented openness. "My people believe that survival is solitary by definition, that to need another is to acknowledge fundamental weakness." "And what do you believe?" Kale asked. The silence stretched between them, filled with the settling sounds of their shelter after the storm. When she finally answered, her voice carried a new quality, something almost like wonder. "I believe I am, reconsidering certain fundamental assumptions." It wasn't a declaration of emotion by human standards, but Kale recognized it for what it was, perhaps the most profound admission Zyra was capable of making. That night, for the first time since his crash landing on Eleutheria, Kale fell asleep with hope warming his chest and Zyra's watchful gaze upon him, her expression holding questions she was only beginning to formulate. 78 days on Eleutheria marked a transformation neither Commander Kale nor Zyra had anticipated. Their shelter had evolved from a survival necessity into something Kale, had begun to think of as home. The interior spaces now reflected their growing understanding of each other, areas designed for Kale's need for movement and exercise, quiet spaces arranged to Zyra's preferences for contemplation, and shared zones where their distinct worlds had begun to merge. The change in Zyra herself was subtle but unmistakable. Her formerly rigid posture had softened, her movements around Kale now fluid and comfortable. The clinical precision of her speech remained, but it was increasingly punctuated by expressions that revealed her evolving emotional awareness, questions about human concepts like humor and nostalgia, observations that went beyond mere survival assessments. "Your recovery has progressed efficiently," she noted one morning, examining his now-healed shoulder with careful fingers. Her touch lingered longer than necessary, a habit that had developed since the night of the storm. "Thanks to my excellent medic," Kale replied with a smile. Zyra's skin patterns shimmered briefly with the blue-violet hue that Kale had come to associate with her pleasure. The treatment protocols were elementary. Yet they both recognized that something profound had shifted between them. Conversations that once focused exclusively on survival now expanded into cultural exchange, personal histories, and increasingly, speculations about the future. Today, however, Zyra seemed preoccupied, her silver eyes frequently drifting to the three moons visible even in daylight. "Is everything all right?" Kale asked as they worked together to maintain their water filtration system. "The celestial alignment approaches," she answered, her tone carrying unusual weight. "The three moons will achieve perfect conjunction tonight, a rare occurrence that holds significance for my people." "A special occasion," Kale prompted when she didn't elaborate further. Zyra's luminescent patterns pulsed with colors Kale hadn't seen before, deep purples and blues interspersed with silver that matched her eyes. "It is a time of truth-speaking," she finally said, when the Vashanti traditionally set aside logical constraints to acknowledge deeper realities. Kale recognized the importance of the moment. "I'd be honored to learn more about this tradition." That evening, Zyra guided him to a crystalline formation atop a ridge overlooking the vast purple forests of Eleutheria. The three moons had begun their convergence, casting the landscape in an otherworldly glow that made Zyra's skin shimmer with increasing luminosity. From a small pouch, she withdrew a vial containing liquid that seemed to capture and amplify the moonlight. With ceremonial precision, she poured it into two shallow crystal bowls she had carried with them. "This is essence of Luma, a bioluminescent organism that reaches peak resonance during the triple conjunction," she explained, offering one bowl to Kale. "It enhances neural perception without altering consciousness. It allows the Vashanti to see beyond our logical constraints." Kale accepted the bowl, understanding the profound trust her inclusion represented. "What should I do?" "Consume it as the moons align, then speak what resonates most deeply," she instructed, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Together they watched the celestial dance above them, the three moons gradually merging into a perfect triad of light. When the alignment completed, Zyra nodded, and they drank the luminous liquid simultaneously. The effect was immediate but gentle, not intoxication but a heightened awareness, as if layers of perception had been peeled away, leaving only essential truths. Colors deepened, sounds clarified, and Kale found himself acutely conscious of Zyra's presence beside him. In the silence that followed, Zyra turned to him, her silver eyes reflecting the triple moonlight. For the first time, Kale could see distinct patterns within them, complex geometries that seemed to hold entire worlds of meaning. "Among my people," she began, her voice carrying new harmonics, "this conjunction marks the only time when we acknowledge that survival alone is insufficient, that there are connections that transcend logical necessity." Kale felt the resonance of her words within him, understanding on a level beyond language that she was sharing something precious and protected. "The Vashanti believe that truth exists beneath our protective layers," she continued. "That when stripped of defensive barriers, essential meaning emerges." Her luminescence had intensified until she seemed formed of light itself. The patterns on her skin forming complex symbols Kale somehow understood were significant. "Human," she said, then corrected herself with unprecedented intimacy. "Kale, in these 78 cycles I have observed a transformation within my cognitive and emotional frameworks." Kale remained silent, sensing she needed to find her way through these unfamiliar territories of expression. Your presence has altered fundamental parameters, she continued, her voice gaining certainty. What began as biological necessity has become something else, something my people rarely acknowledge and never seek. She moved closer, close enough that the light emanating from her skin cast Kale's features in gentle illumination. With deliberate care, she placed her hand over his heart, her silver eyes holding his with newfound directness. "You are my home now, human," she whispered, the words carrying a weight that transcended their simple structure. The declaration hung between them, profound in its simplicity. Kale covered her hand with his own, feeling connection that seemed to transcend their biological differences. "Zyra," he began, but she gently silenced him with a gesture. "You do not understand the significance," she said. "The phrase I have spoken is not casual expression. Among the Vashanti it is Karisvina, the sacred declaration. Once spoken, it cannot be withdrawn." Kale looked at her questioningly, sensing the depth behind her words. "In my culture," she explained, "to name another as one's home is to declare them the center of one's existence. It is a bond deeper than what you call marriage, deeper than family. It is to say that in all the universe I have found where I belong, and it is with you." The weight of her declaration settled over Kale, humbling in its profundity. "I don't know what to say." "You are not bound by my cultural imperatives," Zyra assured him, her hand still resting over his heart. "The declaration places no obligation upon you. It is merely the truth I can no longer contain." But Kale could see it was far more than merely anything. In a culture built on emotional restraint and logical pragmatism, Zyra had offered the most vulnerable part of herself, a declaration that, he now understood, would mark her irrevocably among her own people. Under the influence of the Luma essence, Kale perceived layers of meaning behind her words, the courage it had taken, the fear she had overcome, the profound shift in her understanding of herself and her place in the universe. "In human cultures," he said finally, taking both her hands in his, "we have many words for connection. Friend, lover, partner, soulmate, but none of them quite capture what's grown between us here." Her silver eyes watched him intently, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. "I don't fully understand your cultural context," he continued honestly, "but I understand enough to know that what you've offered is precious and rare." The three moons began their slow separation overhead, the perfect alignment gradually dissolving. As the Luma essence's effects gently faded, Kale and Zyra remained connected, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. That night, as they returned to their shelter beneath a sky now marked forever by new meaning, Kale understood that regardless of whether rescue ever came, his life had been irrevocably altered. The alien woman walking beside him, who had once seemed as cold and impenetrable as the crystalline landscape around them, had offered him something no human ever had, a declaration of belonging that transcended worlds. In the quiet darkness of their shared space, Zyra's luminescence provided gentle illumination as they lay closer than ever before, the formal distances of previous nights abandoned. No further words were spoken, but in the silent language that had developed between them, volumes were communicated through proximity and touch. Tomorrow would bring decisions and consequences, but tonight existed in a space between worlds, a perfect conjunction of their separate lives into something entirely new. 121 days on Eleutheria and the impossible had happened. The emergency beacon Kale had long given up on, rebuilt and modified countless times with Zyra's assistance, had finally pierced the atmospheric interference. A response signal pulsed on their makeshift communications array. Earth Command had locked onto his position. Rescue was imminent. The news should have been met with unalloyed joy. Instead, Kale stood before the display, motionless, as conflicting emotions warred within him. Behind him, Zyra monitored the signal's strength, her luminescent patterns muted to the subdued blue he had learned signified deep contemplation. "Signal integrity is optimal," she reported, her voice carrying the precise tone she had used during their first days together. "Based on their transmission vector, the rescue vessel will achieve orbit within 48 hours. Kale turned to face her. In the weeks since her declaration beneath the triple moons, their relationship had transformed into something that defied categorization by either of their cultures. Physical barriers had fallen away, as emotional ones had, her cool skin against his in the darkness, the discovery of where human and Vashanti physiology aligned and diverged, learning a new language of intimacy that bridged their biological differences. Now, her reversion to clinical speech told him everything about her emotional state. "Zyra," he said softly, crossing the space between them, "we need to talk about what happens next." Her silver eyes met his, more expressive than he would have once believed possible. "The logical progression is self-evident. You will return to your people." "Is that what you want?" he asked directly. Her luminescent patterns flickered with colors that betrayed her inner conflict. "My preferences are irrelevant to the objective reality. You are human. Earth is your biological habitat." Kale gently placed his hands on her shoulders, feeling the subtle vibration of emotion beneath her skin. "That's not what I asked." For a moment, Zyra's careful composure faltered. "I spoke the Karasvina," she said, her voice barely audible. "It does not expire with circumstantial changes." "Nor does what I feel for you," Kale replied. "But feelings don't change the reality we face. I have duties, commitments to Earth Command, and you have your place among the Vashanti." "I have no place among them now," Zyra said with unexpected directness. "The Council would register my emotional evolution as contamination. I would be assigned to isolation and reconditioning." The implications hit Kale like a physical blow. "Because of me, because of us." "Because I no longer conform to Vashanti emotional parameters," she clarified. "The Karasvina is honored in our history but discouraged in modern practice. It represents attachment that supersedes collective welfare." "So if I leave," Kale began. "I would not be welcomed among my people," Zyra finished. "But this should not influence your decision. Your obligation is to your own survival and your command structure." The stark choice crystallized before him: return to Earth alone, knowing Zyra would face rejection among her own people. Or what? The alternative remained undefined, a possibility neither had dared articulate. That night, as Eleutheria's moons cast their now familiar light through the shelter windows, they lay together in a silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. Kale traced the luminescent patterns on Zyra's skin, memorizing their configurations, while she studied his features with an intensity that suggested she was doing the same. "There's a third option," Kale finally said, "one we haven't discussed." Zyra's silver eyes focused on him, waiting. "Come with me," he said simply. "Return to Earth on the rescue vessel." Her skin brightened with surprise. "Your people would accept a non-human life form." "Earth has treaties with 17 non-terrestrial species," Kale explained. "Your biological compatibility with our atmosphere and environment would make transition possible. Different, challenging, but possible." "You would do this?" Zyra asked, genuine wonder in her voice. "Bring an alien into your world?" Kale smiled, running his fingers along the curve of her face. "You said I am your home. Maybe it's time I showed you mine." The vulnerability in her expression was something he might once have thought impossible for a Vashanti. "Among my people, the one who receives the Karasvina traditionally offers a response. You never did." Kale held her gaze steadily. "I was waiting until I knew I could honor it properly." With deliberate care, he shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "In human tradition, this would be the moment I make promises about forever. But we've learned enough about each other to know that words mean different things across our cultures." He placed her hand over his heart, mirroring her gesture from the night of her declaration. "So let me say it in a way that bridges our worlds. Zyra of the Vashanti, you have become my home as well. Not a place, not a shelter, but the center around which my existence now orbits. Whatever planet we stand on, wherever we go from here, that truth remains." The luminescence beneath her skin intensified until the entire shelter was bathed in the blue-violet glow of her emotion. Without words, she drew him closer, initiating the intimate connection they had discovered together. A union of bodies that had once seemed incompatible yet had found harmony through patience and discovery. Their joining that night carried new significance, not just physical pleasure but the sealing of a decision. As they moved together in the perfect synchronization they had learned, Kale whispered against her skin all the human words of love and commitment his language contained. While Zyra's luminescence pulsed in patterns he now recognized as her most profound expression of connection. Later, wrapped in the peaceful aftermath of their union, Zyra traced equations on Kale's chest with her fingertip. The mathematical language she had taught him represented her deepest thoughts. "What are you calculating?" he asked softly. "Not calculating," she corrected. "In the ancient Vashanti tradition, these are the symbols of eternal binding, the mathematical expression of two paths becoming one." Kale covered her hand with his own, stilling her movements. "I may never fully understand all your customs, just as you may struggle with some of mine, but we'll create new ones together." "A hybrid culture," Zyra mused, the concept clearly appealing to her analytical mind. "The logical synthesis of disparate traditions." Kale smiled at how she could make even their love story sound like a scientific paper. It was uniquely her, and he wouldn't change it for anything. The following day, they began preparations. Kale transmitted his acceptance of rescue with one significant addendum. He would be accompanied by a Vashanti representative seeking diplomatic exchange. It wasn't the whole truth, but it would suffice until they reached Earth. As they gathered the essential elements of their shared life, his research, her cultural artifacts, and the hybrid technologies they had created together, Kale noticed Zyra lingering at the shelter's threshold, her gaze sweeping across the strange landscape that had brought them together. "Will you miss Eleutheria?" he asked, joining her in the doorway. Her silver eyes reflected the purple horizons and crystalline formations one last time, before turning to him with newfound certainty. "Eleutheria was never my home," she said, taking his hand in hers. "You are." 2 days later, when the Earth command vessel broke through Eleutheria's atmosphere in a controlled descent, they stood together on the ridge where Zyra had first spoken the Karasvina. As the human rescue team approached with a mixture of shock and wonder at the sight of them together, Kale squeezed Zyra's hand reassuringly. "Ready for a new world?" he asked. Zyra's luminescence pulsed with the confident blue he had come to love. "I am already there." The universe that had crashed them together on a remote planet now stretched before them with infinite possibilities. Two beings from different worlds who had found in each other the truest meaning of home.